everyone, welcome to another philosophy session. Today we're going to be looking at Immanuel Kant. Yeah, as we were looking at David Hume for the past 3 weeks, I think. Last week I briefly mentioned Immanuel Kant and how he was impacted by Hume's empiricism, how he made kind of his own ideas that was a bridge basically between rationalism and empiricism. And we're going to be looking at that today. We're going to be looking at Immanuel Kant. Um, yeah, Kant is a very, very renowned, influential figure in Western philosophy, and I think he might even be better known than Hume himself. And his philosophy is just the foundational work of a lot of the modern understanding of ethics and metaphysics. So yeah, we're going to be looking at his works, his most significant beliefs, and kind of his intellectual breakthroughs that he made and why his ideas kind of remain essential in philosophy and beyond, even in the modern era. So, who was Immanuel Kant? Immanuel Kant was born in a modest family in Königsberg in 1724, and his father, Johann George Kant, was a harness maker, and his mother, Anna Regina, was known for her piety and intellectual curiosity. And both parents raised him in a kind of Pietist tradition, emphasizing religious devotion and moral discipline. And and yeah, as a child, Kant kind of showed an early aptitude for learning, and despite his limited resources, his family encouraged his education. And at age 8, Kant attended the Collegium Friedrichshain, I'm sorry for the bad pronunciation, which was a strict Lutheran school that taught him in excellent Latin, theology, and logic. And through this rigorous foundation, he was prepared for later intellectual paths. Yeah, and he later went on to study in the University of Königsberg, where he studied philosophy, mathematics, and natural sciences. And then he was also here really deeply influenced by Christian Wolff's and his rationalist theory and Isaac Newton's kind of logical scientific discoveries. So he was very much influenced by natural sciences and mathematics. But Kant's academic path still had some challenges. After completing his studies, he had to spend nearly a decade as a private tutor for wealthy families, and this was a position that allowed him to continue his intellectual pursuit, but also one that kind of delayed his academic careers, and he had to do this because of money. Um, yeah, but after a decade, he was eventually able to return to the University of Königsberg, and he earned a doctorate and became a lecturer. And during this period, he kind of began formulating the ideas that would later define his philosophy. Yeah, so just a bit about his philosophy before we get started. I wanted to talk about this. I definitely want to talk about this a little bit in a much more depth next week, but I do want to kind of go over it. I think his ideas are particularly just exemplified by by three questions mainly. What can we know? What should we do? And what what may we hope for? And his answers to these questions basically laid the foundation of modern understanding of a lot of the epistemology and ethics that we are surrounded by. And his works he particularly criticized pure reason, but also criticized just empiricism as Hume knew it, and these kind of ideas remain central to philosophy today. Now, back to more about his personal lives. Yeah, we kind of covered all of this. We also know that he had a very strict, very disciplined, and focused life that was very dedicated to intellectual work. He never married, he did not have any romantic relationships, and he was just fully dedicated to teaching, writing, and thinking. And Kant is often he is often associated with a very rigid daily routine. He woke up at 5 a.m. and worked on his writing and took a walk at the same time each and every afternoon. And this was so punctual that the locals that lived next to him jokingly said that they could set their clocks by him. That was how accurate he kept to this routine. And rigid, scheduled, very structured lifestyle kind of reflected Kant's belief in order and discipline. He was committed to careful thoughts and consistency, and yeah, this just underpins a lot of his philosophy as well. And I think it's really interesting to see that Kant he was not that he was not poor. He was in a pretty wealthy neighborhood. He lived in a okay way, and possibly this may differentiate him from other writers like David Hume, who had to work his way through poverty and kind of establish his own philosophy by himself. Yeah, and in as in his romantic life, he obviously led a very disciplined life, but he was not indifferent to romance completely. Kant is said to have considered marriage several times, but he kind of hesitated last minute. And fundamentally, his dedication to work outweighed everything. And his concern about financial stability, about continuing his work, was his foremost concern. Yeah, and he believed that marriage it requires, and it does, it requires a lot of emotional and financial energy that can be dedicated to intellectual pursuits, and so he decided not to have a romantic life. Some philosophers and some scholars say that Kant has a kind of reserved personality, and that may have contributed to his lack of romantic life and his decision to remain single. But the same kind of idea has been prevalent among many male philosophers, I think, but most of them weren't really that reserved around their friends. And I think it has a lot to do with their dedication more than anything. Yeah, so he had a lot of friends, actually. Kant really valued his friendship, and he maintained very, very close friendships with a lot of colleagues and students that he met along the way. So, famously, he was very close to Johann Greg, Georg Hamann. I am sorry, I'm bad at these names. He was a fellow philosopher, and they kind of admired each other's work, and they also challenged each other. I think these kind of friendships between philosophers and intellectuals are very beautiful. It just allows them to grow mutually and to be able to tolerate the other side, different opinions, as well as their own. Another famous student of Kant who he enjoyed a friendship with was Marcus Herz, and he became a lifelong correspondent with him. And some of the letters we still have today, as it is still kept. And Kant talked about philosophical and personal matters with his friends. And for a lot of intellectuals that were living in the 1700s and the 1800s, their correspondence with their friends reveals a lot about them, even more than their published works do. And it just allows us to see in depth what kind of thoughts Kant were immersed by, how his personal life was structured, and how his life really fundamentally represented his philosophical beliefs. Yeah, let's talk more about his religion. So Kant was raised, as we have said, in a devout pietist household, and his he was born in a very religious way, raised in a very religious tradition. But he went to college, and he was deeply inspired by metaphysics, by natural sciences and mathematics, and he just loved the idea of rational approaches to religion and kind of moral behaviors and dogmatic ideas. But he rejected a lot of the traditional arguments that existed for God. But he didn't completely dismiss the idea of a deity or a higher order that exists over us. And as we have seen, Hume's work kind of helped him to break through this dogmatic approach and allowed him to see through empiricism, understanding the importance of objective and sensory details, but also understanding kind of the play of speculative evidence in religion as well. So yeah, Kant's work just often addressed religion and reason and that they could coexist. And so he laid a bridge between Hume and his kind of very radical empiricist approach and the more traditional rationalism, logical ideas behind it. Yeah, so his he continues to influence debates on the idea of faith and ethics that Hume had started all the way back. Yeah, and Kant worked as a lecturer in the University of Königsberg, as we have said, in 1770, and he taught for over 3 decades. And his lectures were attracted many students. It was very, very popular because it was so clear and engaging. And he covered a lot of topics, just like Hume. He was a very extensive learner. He talked about logic, metaphysics, ethics, and natural sciences. And Kant just encouraged critical thinking for all students. And he encouraged debates among his students. This is why, for example, as we have seen earlier, he was able to become a lifelong correspondent with Marcus Harris because he wasn't a dogmatic teacher who just wrote on the whiteboard and told them to memorize everything, but was someone who was able to engage in philosophical debates with his students. So, yeah, this is just very beautiful, right? And so he just encouraged critical thinking, and it just left a lasting impression on so many of them, I think. And I think his most just groundbreaking works and contributions, what was he called the Copernican revolution in philosophy. And just as the Copernicus just reorientated our understanding of the universe because he famously found out that the Earth is revolving around the sun, not the other way around, Kant kind of argued that the human mind actively shapes how we perceive the world and how we perceive the world. And this is radically different from the most prevalent ideas at the time. The human minds are the ones that are doing are the ones that are perceiving, and it is actually the world around them that are kind of actively shaping how we perceive it. And so this kind of autonomous way of thinking really revolutionized our understanding of human perception. And this idea becomes central to his later one of his later books, The Critique of Pure Reason, published in 1781. And yeah, it suggests that knowledge is not simply derived from the external world, but instead that our minds imposes structures like time, space, and causality on our experiences. This theory, I think, fundamentally changed the way modern philosophers were approaching epistemology, or the study of knowledge itself. And we're going to be looking at many of these books next week. And I just wanted to give you, yeah, kind of an idea of the philosophy that he was looking at, because Kant is a revolutionary person who talked about human dignity, moral autonomy, the ideas of utilitarianism, and ethics and human rights, and all these things kind of comprehensively help us to understand human beings and what we ought to be. Yeah, thank you so much for kind of helping us along here. I tried to incorporate as much aspects of Kant as I possibly could in his earlier life and his education. Next week we're going to be looking at his books, his most famous works, and how that impacted philosophy as we know it. And then the week after that we're going to be looking at his lasting legacy and his influence to us, and how he is relevant to us today. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you have a great day, and I will see you soon next week. Thank you so much, and bye bye.